Hello guys, my name is Nash. Welcome to Thursday Tales of Terror. TTT. For today's story that I'm going to be talking about, it's one of Singapore's most famous case, Huang Na. Just a little summary on this story that I'm going to be talking about. Huang Na was an 8-year-old girl that went missing on 10 of October 2004. Her disappearance caused a nationwide shock, and Singaporeans from all walks of life helped in the search for Huang Na. Back then, when I heard about the news about Huang Na's disappearance, it was pretty scary because something like this never really happened in Singapore, because if you didn't know, Singapore is actually a very small country and it's very hard to get away with crimes. And I was actually staying around the area, not in the area, but it was pretty close to where it all had happened. So parents would tell their children to be back home safely, and it was just this very weird and unsettling feeling in the air when Huang Na went missing without a trace. Now, before I start this video may contain content that some may find disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. After all, it's talking about the murder of a child. Okay, just a little background of Huang Na and her family. Huang Na was born on 26th of September 1996. She was a primary 2 student at Jing Tai Primary School. Her father, Huang Qingrong, and her mother, Huang Shuying, were both born in 1973 to farming families in Putian City in Fujian, China. They met in 1995 and they got married eventually as Shuying was pregnant with Huang Na. In 1996, Huang Na's father Qingrong left China to seek his fortune in Singapore and work illegally as a vegetable packer at this Pasir Panjang wholesale center. Shuying and Huang Na would then stay in China, hoping for Qingrong to make it big there. Unfortunately, the marriage between Huang Na's parents didn't last for very long when Shuying found out that her husband was actually having an affair in Singapore. In fact, he was having several affairs. She filed for a divorce and was given custody of Huang Na. She later married Zhang Wenhai, a Fujian businessman whom she had lived with for 4 years, and became pregnant with her second child in early 2003. She entrusted her relative with the care of her second child as she set her sights on immigrating to Singapore in hopes of earning and doing better there for her family. Now, Huang Na's mother was known as a study mama. So study mamas are foreign women who accompany their children to Singapore while their children receive primary and secondary level education. This study mama phenomenon began in 2000 after the Singapore government relaxed its immigration policies to attract more foreigners. Most of the study mamas back then were from mainland China. So in May 2003, Huang Na's mother immigrated to Singapore as a study mama to accompany Huang Na, who was enrolled in Jing Tai Primary School. Huang Na and her mother moved into a flat at the Pasir Panjang wholesale center, and they shared that flat with 4 other people, and they all became friends soon after. The flat that Huang Na lived in was very small. It was so small that it could only fit in a single bed, and Huang Na and her mother would sleep on the bed while her 4 other flatmates would most likely sleep on the floor. Huang Na's mother began to work at this vegetable store at the Pasir Panjang wholesale center. People from the wholesale center and people from Jing Tai Primary School, they described Huang Na as a very intelligent, independent, sociable and active child. She even won a prize at school and told her mother that she wanted to become a doctor when she grew up so she could give her mother a better life. Now, Huang Na loves to hang around the wholesale center. She loves having conversation and making new friends. She would talk to people who work there, and it's a very clear routine that she had when it comes to hanging around at the center, like at which part she hangs out at and who she spoke to, who she was close to. Usually after school, she would spend her time with people at the minimart, which was located right below her flat, or she would sometimes go to the hawker center, which was located nearby, to grab herself some food before going home. Sometimes she would cook for herself and even cook for her neighbors. Now, on 27 September of 2004, just a day before Huang Na's birthday, Huang Na's mother returned back to China for 2 weeks to visit her second daughter. Huang Na's mother left Huang Na in the care of one of their flatmates, who ensured that Huang Na will go to school as usual, she will have her meals, and will be well taken care of. Huang Na would still carry on her routine of talking to the usual people at the wholesale center. She would hang around the area, never far, but she would make sure to be back home by evenings. As As Huang Na was missing her mother very badly, she wanted to give a call to her mother. It was on a Sunday, 10 October 2004. Huang Na's mother was preparing to fly back to Singapore on that day. As it was a Sunday, Huang Na had no school. She decided to go to the phone booth, which was about 500 meters away from her home. She had wanted to remind her mother about the two presents that she wanted her mother to bring back home from China: a computerized English dictionary and a pair of sandals. Shortly before 1 p.m, Huang Na told one of her flatmates that she would be going out and would be back shortly. Huang Na in fact didn't return shortly as mentioned. Her flatmate wasn't panicking initially because she thought that Huang Na might just be hanging around at the wholesale center, just got caught up with talking to people, just her regular chats. But by the time 2:30 p.m. came around, her flatmate started feeling anxious, so she decided to go down to the wholesale center to go and look for Huang Na. But somehow Huang Na wasn't there, and so she decided to go to Huang Na's primary school, which was also nearby as well. But Huang Na was nowhere to be seen either. At this point, Huang Na's flatmate started panicking, and hurriedly she rushed back home to inform her other flatmates about Huang Na. Together, the four of them would comb through the wholesale center, asking passerbys, people who worked there, anyone that they came across, if they had seen Huang Na, but she was nowhere to be seen. That was until they spoke to Tuk Ling Hao. Tuk Ling Hao was a 22-year-old vegetable packer that worked with Huang Na's mother. He told them that he had seen Huang Na at the wholesale center around 1 p.m, which was the same time that Huang Na had gone to the phone booth to call her mother. And by the time Huang Na's flatmates had spoken to Tuk Ling Hao, it was already 9 p.m. The four of them continued on to search for Huang Na for another hour, and at 10 p.m, when Huang Na was still nowhere to be seen, the four of them decided to call the police and report Huang Na as missing. Huang Na's disappearance was first made public in newspapers on October 14, 4 days after she was last seen at the wholesale center around 1 p.m. The primary 2 pupil of Jingtai Primary School was described as 1.2 meter tall, with a fair complexion and straight dark hair. Upon hearing the news, Huang Na's mother immediately rushed back to Singapore to search for her missing daughter. She managed to arrive in Singapore 2 days after her disappearance. Carrying around pictures of her daughter, she would go around asking people if they had seen Huang Na. She went to Little India and Geylang to look for Huang Na, as both areas were close to where Huang Na was last seen. She even went to Sentosa to look for Huang Na, as they both had been there once before. She would also climb the slopes of the Bukit Timah hill, looking for any signs of her daughter, but to no avail. She was even searching construction sites and ditches. From 7 a.m. to past midnight every day for 3 weeks, Huang Na's mother would look across the island for her daughter. A relative of Huang Na even actually had a dream about Huang Na, that Huang Na was actually being held in Mount Faber, and so Huang Na's mother went there to look for her too, but yet again to no avail. Now Huang Na's mother then tries to trace back to what happened on that particular Sunday. She tries to make sense of the whole timeline. So without a doubt, Huang Na did went to the food court. She did went to the phone booth because she had received a call from her daughter, and she told her daughter about how there were some problems with her flight, so she wouldn't be back home on that day. Instead, she will fly back the following day or a few days after. And she recalled Huang Na being okay with it, like Huang Na didn't sound too upset about the news. She didn't seem too bothered by the flight delay either. Huang Na's mother could not imagine why anyone would want to harm her daughter. She worked here for a living so that her daughter could study, and according to Huang Na's mother, they didn't make any enemies or they didn't offend anyone, so she was very puzzled by Huang Na's disappearance. Other than Tuk Ling Hao, who had seen Huang Na at the food court, a coffee shop assistant at the food court had also seen her that afternoon at around 1 p.m. The coffee shop assistant gave details on what Huang Na was wearing. She was wearing a blue denim jacket, Bermuda shorts, and she was seen barefoot. But that's about it. There had been no sightings of her, there were no more leads, there were no more informations. Now, volunteers formed search parties, and Crime Library, a voluntary group dedicated to finding missing persons, distributed over 70,000 leaflets appealing for information. A local recycling company had actually printed those leaflets for free to aid in the search. Local taxi company Comfort Delgro asked its cabbies to join in the search effort as well. And a 60-year-old retired businessman actually offered a $10,000 reward to anyone with information information about Huang Na. Another Singaporean also chipped in another $5,000 for finding Huang Na, while the manager of an online design company set up a website to raise awareness and get a tip-off. The search even extended to Malaysia, with volunteers putting up posters in the nearby cities of Johor Bahru and Kuala Lumpur. Reportedly, at least 30 cabbies also placed posters of Huang Na on the rear windscreens and front seats of their vehicles. At least 5 coffee shop owners in Johor Jaya, Taman Yu and Skudai put up posters as well. Parents and families throughout Singapore kept their eyes out for Huang Na, and they were also watching their children closely, fearing that something may happen to their children too. Those who tried to help Huang Na's mother said it was heart-wrenching to watch news clips of the mother clutching her daughter's toys, clothes and pictures, walking through neighborhoods with tears in her eyes, calling out for Huang Na's name. Now the police, including a criminal investigation department team, conducted an intensive search for the girl, and officers carried photographs of her while on their daily rounds. The investigators initially focused their searches on the area surrounding the wholesale center where Huang Na was last seen. They quickly learned that the last person to have seen Huang Na alive was 22 years old vegetable packer Tuk Ling Hao, the same man that Huang Na's flatmate spoke to on the night that Huang Na went missing. Now just a little introduction to Tuk Ling Hao, because he will have a very major part in the story later on. Tuk Ling Hao was born in Malaysia on 16 December 1981 as the second child of a close-knit family of 4. Tuk Ling Hao came to Singapore when he was 18 to seek better paying jobs. He married an Indonesian Chinese woman and even had a son. Those who worked at the wholesale center said that Tuk Ling Hao and Huang Na were very close. He would often play together with Huang Na. He would buy for her food to eat and he would ride her around on his motorcycle. When Huang Na's mother was asked about Tuk Ling Hao, she believed that Tuk Ling Hao wasn't the one that will take her daughter. According to Huang Na's mother, Tuk Ling Hao was very fond of Huang Na. He would always buy things for her to eat, but never ever took her outside of the market, so she was very confident Tuk Ling Hao will never hurt her daughter. So investigators formally spoke to Tuk Ling Hao on the 19th of October 2004. After 9 days, Huang Na went missing. He told the authorities that he had seen Huang Na at the phone booth when she was calling her mom. In fact, he had told Huang Na to actually go home. He even offered to show the investigators the exact same spot that he had spoken with Huang Na. However, the following day, on the 20th October of 2004, Tuk Ling Hao didn't quite stick to his story. He told the officers that he saw Huang Na was being kidnapped by 4 gang members at the center. He claimed that this man had wanted to teach Huang Na's mother a lesson. He even said that he knew this group of Chinese men well. However, Tuk Ling Hao claimed that the phone number for this group of Chinese men was in his other phone, a phone that he kept in his flat. Because his statements weren't consistent, and in fact both of the statements were very different from one another, the police requested for a polygraph test to be done, which is like a lie detector test, and he agreed to do it the following morning. He also agreed to go in with the 4 police officers to collect the phone from his flat and from his workplace. When they got back at the police station after collecting the phones, Tuk Ling Hao suddenly offered to do the lie detector test sooner, and the police agreed. The test, however, will need to be taken at the CID headquarters, and the police will need to escort him there. As the police were escorting Tuk Ling Hao from the police station to the CID headquarters, he told the police officer that he was hungry and asked if he could grab some food at the restaurant along Pasir Panjang Road. The police agreed and accompanied him into the restaurant. He ordered chicken curry, and halfway through his meal, Tuk Ling Hao said that he needed to use the toilet. The police officer stayed at the table as Tuk Ling Hao excused himself to go to the toilet. Instead of going to the toilet, Tuk Ling Hao escaped from the police through the back door of the restaurant. He took a taxi to the Woodlands checkpoint, and because he had this CID's visitor's pass, and this CID's visitor's pass actually had a CID emblem on it, he was actually given this pass when he was giving his statement to the authorities. He used the pass to sneak into Malaysia. He actually managed to cross over the customs checkpoint, as the custom officer officers thought that he was a police officer with that pass, and so they did not ask him any questions and they let him through. His sudden disappearance of course made him a suspect in the case. As all of these were taking place, a team of forensic scientists had been searching through the wholesale center looking for evidence, and as Tuk Ling Hao was the last person to be seen with Huang Na, his place of work was the obvious starting point for the investigation. The authorities were also aware that Tuk Ling Hao had bought some mangoes around the time that Huang Na went missing. These mangoes were of interest to the investigators because if Huang Na's body was found and her stomach contained mangoes, it could provide a link to Tuk Ling Hao. The forensic team then went to this particular storeroom at Block 15 in the wholesale center. It was where Tuk Ling Hao had worked. There were faint blood stains on the wall. Fibers were found and collected on the carpet of the storeroom. There had also been some staining on the carpet, and these were all swabbed and collected, and the preliminary tests of all these swabs confirmed the investigators that the stains indeed contained traces of blood and urine. To determine whose blood and urine were those, further testings were needed. On 22nd of October 2004, almost 2 weeks after Huang Na's disappearance, the press named Tuk Ling Hao as a person of interest in the investigation, and because of this press coverage, the public began a manhunt for him. This manhunt spread very quickly throughout Singapore and even across the border into Malaysia. It soon found its way into Tuk Ling Hao's hometown, and 9 days after being on the run, Tuk Ling Hao surrendered himself to the police in Penang and was brought back to Singapore on October 30th, 2004. His stories of Huang Na kept changing and changing. Initially, after he surrendered himself to the police, he told them that Huang Na had collapsed to the floor and was having what seemed like a seizure when he was playing hide and seek with her. Tuk Ling Hao also mentioned that this game of hide and seek involves Huang Na having to tie her ankles together. He also told the investigators that they would play games quite similar to this quite frequently, which involve having her hands or legs tied up together, and usually she would be able to untie it herself. In this most recent game of hide and seek, as usual, her ankles would be tied together. He would then switch off the lights for her to hide, and he would bang his hands on the table calling out for her name to let her know that he is coming to find her in this game. But as the game was proceeding, he claimed that he heard a sudden thump. Tuk Ling Hao then switched on the lights to find Huang Na lying on the floor. These are all quoted by him. Something was amiss. She seemed to have vomited blood because blood was trickling out from the right corner of her mouth. She seemed to be going into a spasm. Her eyes were wide open and there was urine all over the floor. I immediately went over to call her name, but she did not reply and she was still having her spasm. I did not know what to do. I wanted to untie her ankles, but I did not know how to undo the knot. I sat on a chair in a daze and looked at her. Now, Tuk Ling Hao then told the police that he tried to chop at the back of Huang Na's neck in an attempt to get her to wake up after she had stopped moving, but there were no reactions from Huang Na. At this point, Tuk Ling Hao began to panic. Tuk Ling Hao then gave several versions of the story as to what happened next, so it's a bit hard to know which was the true version of what really had happened, and it makes the whole story just very confusing. One of which he claimed that his mind totally went blank. He did not know why, but he put both his hands around her neck and pressed it. He pressed it momentarily with his eyes closed, and after some time, he relaxed his hands and opened his eyes and looked at Huang Na. Her face had turned greyish-white, although her eyes were open. He then claimed that Huang Na was having hiccups and wouldn't stop hiccuping, so it kind of freaked him out, and so he decided to stomp on her body. What? The way he reacted to this situation is definitely not what a normal, decent human being would do. The girl obviously needs medical attention, but instead he does all this stomping and choking, which really doesn't make sense to me. And after all this had happened, he decided to do something even worse. He decided to strip Huang Na and did unthinkable acts to her, meaning to say he sexually assaulted her or rape her. He claimed that he wanted to frame Huang Na's death as a rape-related murder. Tuk Ling Hao then packed her body in a cardboard box, loaded it on his motorbike, and drove all the way to Telok Blangah Hill Park, which was nearby, where he threw the cardboard box over the edge. The box fell into a heavily wooded forest below. The following morning, after the confession from Tuk Ling Hao on 31st October 2004, about 3 weeks after Huang Na went missing, a team of 20 police officers and trackers fan out to search the slope at the Telok Blangah Hill Park. They were acting on information provided by Tuk Ling Hao. After 30 minutes at about 10:30 a.m., officers came across a box measuring 50 cm by 40 cm by 30 cm in thick vegetation. The box, which resembled those used at the Pasir Panjang Wholesale Centre, was sealed with masking tape. Still, a foul smell emanated from it. Inside was the naked body of a young girl forced into a crouching position. It was so decomposed that forensic tests had to be done before it was confirmed that the body was Huang Na's. But the girl was also visually identified by her mother, and it was a very traumatic experience for her. Huang Na's body had been found within the cardboard box in 9 plastic bags that had each been layered and wrapped around her remains. Those plastic bags meant that Huang Na's remains had been quite well preserved. The cardboard box and the plastic bag found within were then sent to the forensics to be compared against samples and forensic evidence at Tuk Ling Hao's workplace. The fibers that they had collected from the storeroom were confirmed to have been fibers from denim clothing. If you remember, Huang Na was wearing a blue denim jacket, and the blood and hair samples were confirmed to have contained the DNA profile of 8-year-old Huang Na. On November 8, 2004, more than 1,000 people, many of them strangers, attended her funeral. They followed the procession which went to the West Coast Market, a playground, and Jingtai Primary School, places which Huang Na frequented. The lid of a coffin was covered with her favourite Hello Kitty soft toys, the sides plastered with Hello Kitty stickers, and a Hello Kitty toy hung from each corner of the hearse. Mourners brought many of her favourite sweets and snacks. She was cremated at Mandai, and if you didn't know this, the funeral director actually handled Huang Na's funeral for free. Now, an autopsy had revealed that Huang Na did conceive some mangoes shortly before her death, so there is a link to Tuk Ling Hao there. The prosecution presented the theory that Tuk Ling Hao had lured Huang Na with the mangoes he bought into the storeroom where he then smothered her. Her official cause of death was determined to have been acute airway occlusion or blockage, which means to say Huang Na had been smothered. 5 injuries were also discovered on her face close to her mouth, which is consistent with injuries sustained when someone is smothering you using their hands to cover the mouth and the nose. The injuries were further established to have been inflicted with enough force that smothering was considered to be the possible cause of death. There were also injuries found on the scalp. The injuries could be caused by either being smacked against a flat hard object or by heavy hitting to the head. It could have also been caused by someone stomping or kicking the head. Now, injuries to the right arm and left thighs were also present. In terms of whether Tuk Ling Hao did sexually assault Huang Na couldn't really be confirmed by the medical examiners, but the lack of physical evidence of a sexual assault does not rule out the possibility of it having taken place. Presented with all these findings given by the medical examiners, it was hard to believe that Huang Na's death was accidental. The findings from the autopsy did support the prosecution belief that Tuk Ling Hao had killed Huang Na to prevent her from reporting to the police about the rape. Now, the trial officially began on 11 July 2005. The prosecution relied heavily on the theory that Tuk Ling Hao had lured Huang Na into the storeroom with the mangoes he bought, which he then would sexually assault her and then proceed on to smother her after that. Tuk Ling Hao's defense team, on the other hand, tried to argue that Huang Na had died accidentally. On cross-examination, the medical examiner who carried out the autopsy agreed with the defense that it was possible that the airway occlusion, which was Huang Na's cause of death, could have occurred when she was being put in a plastic bag while she was still alive. The medical examiner further agrees that Huang Na could have died after choking on her own blood or vomit. Now, when the defense counsel suggested that Huang Na could have suffered from a fit or a seizure, an expert witness who was a doctor testified that children usually don't develop seizures without any medical or family history. But when Huang Na was found to have a bruised tongue, vomiting and loss of bowel control, it matched the description of a seizure. The bruised tongue could have been caused by Huang Na herself when she was biting on her own tongue when having a seizure. Now, even though all these scenarios could have been possible, it didn't mean that they were facts. I believe the defense could have argued as such because there wasn't substantial proof due to the rate that her body had been decomposed. At this point, I want to delve deeper why Tuk Ling Hao was convicted. So a video of Tuk Ling Hao reenacting what happened to Huang was being played in court. In this video, using a dummy of course, he would demonstrate how he wrapped up Huang body. He demonstrated how he strangled her. Then using his hands, he chopped Huang on the back of the neck 3 times in order to put her out of her misery. He also stamped on her head 3 times. He then stripped her and molested her with his fingers so that people would think that she was being raped. Next, he used scissors to cut her clothing to make it real. In the video at the very end, he could be heard saying, "Just like that, just like that." Now, several witnesses took the stand as well against Tuk Ling Hao. Tuk Ling Hao's colleague who took the stand had seen him scolding the girl on several occasions and said that he even hurt her at least once. Tuk Ling Hao's employer recalled confronting him after seeing the bruises on the girl's hands back in July 2003. Tuk Ling Hao claimed that Huang was making too much noise and he was unable to sleep. Another witness who worked as a packer recalled that on 1 or 2 occasions, Tuk Ling Hao would tie the girl's hands with raffia string to teach her a lesson so that she wouldn't disturb them. Huang Na's mother also took the stand and she said that she had seen Tuk Ling Hao losing his temper and throwing things when he was agitated. She recounted an incident in which she claimed that Tuk Ling Hao had actually hit Huang Na when they all went on a crab catching excursion. If you didn't know this, Tuk Ling Hao was actually being assessed by a psychiatrist. Now, there were 3 points to why the psychiatrist thought that Tuk Ling Hao might have schizophrenia. The first point was Tuk Ling Hao's irrational and inexplicable strangling of Huang Na, whom he regarded her as his own daughter. Second was his delusions when he mentioned that he saw Huang Na being kidnapped by gang members. Third, and lastly, his reactions to her death, which he had failed to display any remorse or regret. That meant that Tuk Ling Hao could not be fully accountable for his actions if he did have schizophrenia. However, the prosecution psychiatrist argued that it was not possible that Tuk Ling Hao could have been suffering from delusions or hallucinations, much less schizophrenia when he killed Huang Na. This is the statement taken from the prosecution psychiatrist. "I have never seen such a case in my entire years as a psychiatrist where a patient becomes mentally ill right at the time when the offense is committed. There are usually disturbances before that." Now, Tuk Ling Hao was not mentally dull either. Even though his IQ of 76 put him just above the mentally retarded bracket, which is usually considered 70 or below, the prosecution also pointed out that he had no history of mental abnormality, and there was nothing disorganized about the way he went about killing Huang Na. Deputy Public Prosecutor Ang said that he had calmly and systematically gone about killing the deceased. His every action during the killing was pregnant with reason. It was noted during the trial on the meticulous manner in which Tuk Ling Hao had planned the disposal of Huang Na's body and clothes. In fact, Tuk Ling Hao had chosen a rubbish bin that was not monitored by any CCTV camera to dump her clothes, and that actually says a lot. On August 26, 2005, Tuk Ling Hao was found guilty and sentenced to hang. According to Justice Lai, his conduct after the killing was clearly the product of a cold and calculated mind. Now, Tuk appealed the death sentence, but the Court of Appeal of Singapore, by a majority of 2-1 decision, upheld the decision in January 2006, with 2 judges agreeing with Justice Lai's decision to convict Tuk Ling Hao of murder, while the third and final judge disagreed with the murder conviction due to the cause of death being inconclusive. Tuk Ling Hao's family and relatives decided to submit a clemency plea to the President S.R. Nathan, which would allow Tuk Ling Hao's sentence to be commuted to life imprisonment, if accepted. Eventually, they gathered about 35,000 signatures from members of the public. The President took about 8 months to consider before he decided to reject the plea in October 2006. Tuk Ling Hao was then hanged in Changi Prison on November 3, 2006, not before choosing his own obituary picture after a photo-taking session in Changi Prison. He was dressed in new clothes brought by his family. So that's the end of my Huang Na story. I hope that you managed to understand and learn about her story better and what actually happened to her. If you like stories like this, you could send in your story request to me. I've provided an email below at the description box. I upload videos every Thursday. If you like this kind of stories and if you like the way I tell them, please give me a like and subscribe to my channel. But anyway, see you next Thursday with another story.